This is a story told by a friend of mine from college in Texas. Soft candles flickered along the pews, and the faint smell of pine needles and cinnamon hung in the air, blending with the cool winter breeze that whispered through the stained glass windows. The church bells rang in harmony, signaling that Christmas Eve had finally arrived. Madeline stood at the back of the church, her heart pounding in her chest. This was it, the moment she had dreamed of for years. The grand, sparkling dress she wore shimmered beneath the chandelier lights. Her mother, long gone, had worn it too on her own wedding day, and Madeline had decided to follow that tradition. She had waited her whole life for this moment, and now it was here. She was about to marry the man she loved, the man who had stood by her through thick and thin, her perfect match, her soulmate, Daniel. As the music swelled, the doors of the church opened, revealing the altar at the far end, where Daniel awaited her. His back was straight, his handsome face lit with an eager smile. He was everything she had hoped for in a partner, loving, kind, patient. Today was going to be the happiest day of her life. But then, just as Madeline took her first step forward, she froze. A soft but insistent tug at her sleeve made her pause. Her heart skipped a beat. It was Rufus. Her golden retriever. He was standing in front of her, blocking her path, looking up at her with his big, soulful eyes. The same dog who had been with her since she was a child. The same dog who had comforted her when her father died, who had sat by her side through lonely nights, and who had welcomed Daniel with wagging tails and unflinching loyalty. Rufus was more than just a pet, he was family. But now, as she stood there on the threshold of her future, Rufus was blocking her way. "Rufus," Madeline whispered, unsure what to make of this sudden interruption. She bent down to his level, gently coaxing him. "Come on, sweet boy. It's time." But he only whimpered softly, nudging her dress with his nose, his tail tucked between his legs. He wasn't the playful dog he used to be. There was something in his eyes, something that looked almost desperate. Madeline's heart tightened in her chest. She didn't understand. Why would he do this now? Why was he acting so strange? "Rufus, please," she said, her voice breaking as she straightened up and looked down the aisle at Daniel. He was still waiting, but she could see the confusion on his face now too. Their eyes locked briefly, and she gave him a soft, apologetic smile, motioning for him to wait. Madeline gently placed a hand on Rufus's back, but he wouldn't move. His gaze was fixed on her face, his body tense. A low growl escaped him, something that made her heart stop. Rufus never growled. He was always gentle, always affectionate. She tried again, reaching for his collar, but before she could do anything more, Rufus took a step backward, and, as if understanding the weight of the moment, he turned and trotted toward the side door of the church. "Wait. Rufus, come back." Madeline called after him, her voice trembling. She didn't know why, but she felt an overwhelming urge to follow him. She wasn't sure why, but something told her she couldn't leave the church yet. Without waiting for Daniel or anyone else to stop her, Madeline hurried down the side aisle, through a small wooden door at the back of the church, where Rufus had gone. The cold night air hit her face as she stepped outside, and she found the dog standing in front of a small stone bench, looking up at her with those soulful eyes. But there was more than just confusion in his gaze now. There was something else, something profound, something that made Madeline's heart lurch. Rufus walked slowly over to her and nudged a piece of paper with his nose. It was crumpled, as though it had been lying there for a while. Madeline bent down, picked it up, and unfolded it, her hands trembling. It was a letter. Her name was written in a scrawling, almost frantic hand. The paper smelled faintly of ink and something more, something familiar, but she couldn't quite place it. The letter read, "Madeline, I know you'll hate me for doing this, but I couldn't bear to watch you walk down that aisle today without telling you the truth. Rufus has been my dog since the beginning. I know you think he's yours, but there's something I need you to understand. He was supposed to be yours forever, but I took him, and I know you'll never forgive me for it. But please, for the love of everything we shared, believe me when I say it was out of love. Please come find me, Madeline. Before it's too late." Madeline's breath caught in her throat. She stared at the letter, her heart racing, but the words seemed to blur as her mind scrambled to make sense of it. Who could this letter have been from? And what did it mean? But then her eyes darted to Rufus, who was now standing at her feet, his body trembling. Madeline's thoughts whirled in a storm of confusion, and she felt her knees give way as she sank down to the ground. Rufus lay down beside her, his head resting on her lap, as if offering comfort. In that moment, everything became clear. She had spent years thinking Rufus had simply been a dog who had appeared in her life by chance, a gift from her parents. But now, reading the letter, everything fell into place. She recalled the strange circumstances of how she had adopted Rufus all those years ago, how her old college boyfriend had suddenly shown up and given her the dog without much explanation. How he had acted strangely before leaving her life, disappearing into the shadows of her past without another word. But now, it seemed that he had been hiding something all along. And that X in the letter, the mysterious figure from her past, was the key. Suddenly, a figure appeared at the door of the church, his silhouette framed by the light spilling out from within. "Daniel." "Madeline?" he called softly, his voice filled with concern. He was no longer in his wedding suit. Instead, he was dressed in a thick winter coat, his hands tucked into his pockets. "Madeline, what's wrong? You're not going to leave, are you?" Her mind raced as she held the letter in her hands, the weight of it pressing down on her. But more than that, it was Rufus. She knew, deep in her soul, that the dog had been trying to tell her something. Something that would change everything. "No," she whispered, tears threatening to spill over. "I'm not going back in there, Daniel." Daniel's face contorted with confusion and concern as he stepped closer, his voice now a little more desperate. "Why not? We've been planning this for months, Madeline. What's going on? What are you holding?" This letter," she said, her voice shaking. "It's from someone I thought I'd forgotten." Daniel's eyes flickered with recognition, but then he looked at Rufus, his gaze softening. "I know this must be hard for you," he said quietly. "But sometimes we have to let go of the past to move forward, to embrace what's in front of us. I thought we were ready." Madeline wiped her eyes and looked up at him, the pieces of the puzzle beginning to click together. She knew what she had to do, even if it meant abandoning the wedding, abandoning the life she had so carefully constructed. "Rufus didn't block my way because he didn't want me to marry you, Daniel," she said, her voice breaking as she looked at the dog. "He's trying to tell me there's something I still don't know. Something I need to face." And with that, she stood, holding the letter close to her chest. She didn't know where this path would lead, but for the first time in years, she felt a sense of peace. The road ahead was uncertain, but with Rufus by her side, she was ready to face whatever came next.